So far, we've talked about things like Google search and how exactly the Google algorithm determines, what things we see first when we search for something on the web. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how to actually create effective web-based materials. There are some practices that can be really useful in helping to create web-based materials that are effective in helping to communicate to your target audience. So we're going to talk about some of those effective practices. These are practices that you should apply in the lab for this class, but they're also going to be helpful in terms of, after this class and throughout your professional career when you might have to create online or web-based material. So oftentimes when you are writing a class paper and you've got to maybe reach a long page limit, let's say you have to write a 12-page paper, a lot of times, students write, we call it fluffy writing, right? You're kind of writing long sentences. It may not be super direct and to the point. You've got a lot of space and you're not really worried about the length of your content. When it comes to writing for the web, this is a very, very different approach compared to what you're probably used to when you're writing for your class papers. So when you're writing for the web, you're writing content for the internet. Readers are often looking for very, very quick answers to their questions. They don't want to have to read through a lot of text in order to find the question that they're looking for in terms of that answer. They're often scanning for the information that they need. And when I say scanning, they're reading through very quickly that material to try and find the answer. They're often on their phones and they're not actually sitting at a desktop computer reading things word for word. They're on a small screen on their phone. It might be an iPad and they're looking for content that way as well. And, one of the things about the internet and, the pages on the internet is that there are a lot of them. And so if an audience or a target person you're trying to target, if they cannot find that information as the consumer on your page immediately, they're going to go somewhere else, right? They've got a lot of different options in terms of information that is available online. So it's really, really important to be very concise in your writing, to be very direct in your writing, and to make sure you're organizing information in a way that's really, really easy for that consumer in order to be able to skim, to be able to read that content really quickly and find the answers they're looking for. Otherwise, they're going to go somewhere else. So you have to capture their attention. Some tips for writing web pages. You want to make sure that your content is easy to understand. So you want to make sure that you're using the active voice and you're using conversational language. So, when I say conversational language, I mean, everyday language, things that people are going to be able to understand and comprehend. You want to avoid jargon and technical terms. This can be really off-putting to people, and if they start to see words that they don't understand, they might leave your page. Also, if they don't understand it, you're not doing a good job of communicating that information to that person. So you definitely want to stay away from jargon if you can, and any technical terms if you can. Sometimes you have to include, terms that might be unfamiliar to people if you absolutely have to. If you absolutely have to, you should make sure that you define them, and you define them in a way that your audience can actually understand what those terms mean. So you have to provide definitions for terms that might be unfamiliar to your target audience. You also want to keep sentences to 20 words or fewer. Your content should be easy to read and it should be really brief and very concise. So keeping those sentences to 20 words or fewer is going to make it easier for your consumer who's actually reading that information. It's going to make it easier for them to read through that information online. You want to make sure, in terms of the way that you're writing, you want to make sure that it's understandable for your target audience. And so this might depend on who your target audience is, But in general, rule of thumb is to keep it at a 6th grade reading level. So this is going to, require using terms that are basically understandable by a 6th grader, right? You want to avoid writing in large words that your audience might not be able to comprehend. And one of the biggest things that I think is just so important in writing for the web, but also writing in general, is to remove unnecessary words. Think about when you write a sentence. Do I need this word? Does this word add anything? So, think about that. Make sure you're writing in a way that is very, very concise and to the point, and you don't have extra words that are just kind of fluff words that really don't add any value to whatever it is that you're writing. The first place you can kind of think about this is looking through your elevator pitch. So, your elevator pitch is going to help create the context for your About Us page, and having that text in there for each individual person on your team. Read through that now that it's been a little bit and, figure out, are all of the words that I put in my elevator pitch, are they absolutely necessary? Are they adding anything? Are they adding any value to my sentences? Or are they kind of just placeholder words that I can remove? So again, you want to make sure that you're not using fluff to make things longer. Less is better when it comes to writing for web pages. You also want to make sure you're using the active voice instead of the passive voice. Now, I think this is really important in writing in general, even beyond writing for the web. However, this is really critical for the web in terms of clearly getting your information and your message across in a really concise, clear way. So for example, the active voice here on this slide would be Tim taught the class. Versus the passive, which we want to avoid, the passive version of this would say, the class was taught by Tim. You can see how much shorter the active version is, right? It's 1, 2, 3, 4 words versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, right? It's clearer, it's more to the point, and it's very concise. So some tips for writing for web pages. You really want to have a very clear layout. Layout can be key to making things easy to understand. It can also be really important in terms of, your reader, when they go to your site, that layout is like one of the first things that they typically notice about your site. And so if you've got a really busy, kind of messy layout that looks intimidating, they may not stick around. They might just go to something else. So this layout and having a very clear layout is really, really important. The first thing you want to do is use bullets and headings to kind of what we say chunk or group information in a way that's easy to understand. You want to remember that your reader is scanning quickly for the information that they want, right? So you want to make it really easy for them to find it. Chunking is really nice because, you can cover specific topics in different sections. And when you're chunking information, you really only want to cover one topic per paragraph. So you shouldn't be covering multiple topics if you've chunked information into a single paragraph. You want to include a lot of white space. It can be really overwhelming when you go to a web page or a website where it is just filled with text, right? So you want to make sure there's a lot of white space so it's welcoming to the reader and it's not overwhelming. You want to use call-out boxes to emphasize really important information. If there's information that you really want your audience member to take and to read, use a call-out box to call out that information. Do not use blinking icons, moving text, really aggressive colors. You want it to look professional, and you don't, again, want to deter whoever it is that you're trying to get to read your website. You don't want them to feel overwhelmed or confused by what you've put on your web page. And you also want to consider using graphics, maps, charts, and interactive content to convey main messages. It's really important to, avoid just relying on text and words. A lot of the times we can really effectively communicate information by using graphics and visuals. And so, think about the information you need to include on your webpage and think about, what do I need to include in text format? And what can I include in some sort of visual format in order to communicate my message to my audience? So some tips for headings, bullets, and fonts. Headers should be different in some way. If you don't make headers different, they can kind of blend in with the rest of the text and they're kind of hard to identify. So, your header should be different from the other text in some way. Whether you make those bolded, you make the text larger in size, whatever strategy you use, you want to make sure that that header text looks different from the rest of the text. So your reader can very clearly identify, this is a section of my page, this is the next section of my page, and it's separated by those headers. Do not use periods at the end of bullets. The issue with periods at the end of bullets is that it stops the person's eyes from scanning. So if you've got a bullet, a period after each bullet, it kind of signals the end of a sentence, right? And so you don't want those periods there because you want the person to be able to kind of go through and scan the information really easily. Also, don't underline or use boldface, italics, headings or indentations unnecessarily. It's distracting. Underlined text will get confused as hyperlinks, and it kind of takes away from, using those approaches of using bold text, using italics to really draw the reader's attention to a very specific piece of information. So when you kind of overuse them, it kind of defeats the purpose of their use in general. Also, indentation doesn't help a lot because, spacing is really important and is used in web content. I mentioned that it's really important to have white space. So you want to think more about, not indentation, but, spaces between paragraphs and sections to make sure that you've got enough white space in there so it's not overwhelming for your reader. You also want to make sure that you're using really meaningful headlines that, are grabbing the reader's attention, but they serve a number of purposes. So, headlines, they allow the reader to navigate content, right? So, they should, really describe the content that's in the paragraph, right? Whatever that headline is should correspond to whatever content is written below that. They should be short, less than 8 words or 8 words, right? Really no longer than that. They should stand on their own and they should be able to be understood kind of out of context. So there shouldn't be text, around those headlines that's required in order for the person to understand whatever that headline is. They should be able to be interpreted and understood on their own. And they should be search engine friendly, right? You want your page to come up when someone, searches for whatever it is that you've got content on. Some other tips for writing for the web, you want to start with the conclusion. So, when we write papers for class, we usually kind of leave the conclusion for the very end. When you're writing for the web, it really is the opposite. You want to start with the conclusion. It is the most important content, right? And so the most important content should actually be in the first paragraph, in that first part of your web page. You want to be really brief. As I've mentioned previously, you want to be really concise and really brief. Your paragraph should not exceed 70 words. If they're longer than 70 words, then they're too long and no one is going to read them. Your web content should be 300 to 800 words total. Again, if it exceeds this, people may not read your content online. You want to use links strategically. You don't want to overwhelm your reader with links. It can get really overwhelming when a page is just bombarded with a lot of links. So use them strategically as needed. You want to keep your resources page relatively short. You don't want to overwhelm your audience. And you want to make sure that your content is up to date. Things are always changing. We're getting new data, research gets updated. So you always want to make sure, you're keeping your content up to date in order to establish your credibility and keep your credibility. Links are really, really important when you're writing for the web. And so there's some really important tips for using links effectively. You can use links to, link people to relevant information. You want to make sure that you've set these up where when someone clicks on that link, it opens a new window when you're hyperlinking to another site. You don't want someone to click that link and then that page that they're currently on just goes to the other page that they've clicked on. You're then taking readers away from your current site, and you don't ever want to take your reader away from your current site, right? You want to keep them on that site so they're engaged. So when you can, make sure that you're including that link so where it opens in a new window and that person can then, look at that new window when they have a chance to do so, but you're not taking them away from your page. You can also use anchor links when navigating within the same content. So, you've got a link towards the top of the page, and if someone clicks on, maybe it's a line there, it'll take them kind of further down the page to whatever that section is. So that can be really helpful when someone's trying to navigate kind of the same content on a page. You want to make sure links motivate your users to read your content. So, make sure that, your links aren't kind of distracting people. You want to make sure that it's motivating your user to read your content. And lastly, don't make readers search for something you mention in your content. New users only spend about 30 seconds on average on a web page. So if you're making it difficult for someone to find information that you mention in your content, that's going to be really frustrating. So, don't set that up like that for your reader. They'll get frustrated. And lastly, another really important tip for using effective links, you want to make links contextual using part of a sentence or phrase as the link. So a lot of students like to say, click here for more information on. Don't do that. Don't say click here. Click here is not, it's not engaging. It kind of looks spammy. It's just not a good practice. So, you want to avoid doing that. Instead, you can say, as the example shows here, yes is the to learn more about emerging health communication and marketing science topics, check out, Health Communication Science Digest, right? And you can click on that link. That person knows exactly what it is they're clicking on. It's really clear, and that will then take them to that page in a new window. You do not want to say click here. To find out more about the Health Communication Science Digest, click here. That person's not entirely sure what they're clicking on. It's very unclear, and it's just not best practice. So you should never, have links that say click here. They should really be, embedded in that sentence, and they should leverage the text in that sentence. So, these are some of the best practices for writing for the web and helping to create, effective web content. It's really important to use the checklist from the CDC. So make sure to check out the checklist in the CDC's Health Communications Playbook, which is accessible via this link here. And it's also available as a PDF in the module.